Well, thank you very much. I'm Dina Titus, and I represent Southern Nevada in the Congress, and that includes Las Vegas. So we hope you'll all come and see me. It's a very international city in terms of who lives here and who visits here. I sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Subcommittee on Europe, and I'm the ranking member of the House Democracy Partnership, which partners with other legislatures in new democracies to encourage that institutional development. I co-chair, as Gus graciously mentioned, the Greek caucus, but also other international state caucuses ranging from France to Mongolia. So it's quite an interesting combination. Gus did a good job of talking about what's happening in relation to Greece, but I took kind of a broader sweep at this in terms of what will be the foreign policy directives of the U.S. under the two potential administrations, Harris-Walz or Trump-Vance. We now know that 2024 has been the year of elections. They've had elections in some 70 countries and half of the world's population. So there's been a lot going on in terms of expression of democracy, rule of law, human rights everywhere around the globe. And certainly that's happening here in the next 60 days, which are coming very rapidly. Our own election's going to be enormously consequential because it's going to dictate the future of liberal international order, international institutions and rules, and of course what our role will be in terms of global security. Up until now, what you've seen in the news, the values and norms that have guided the post-war world continue to steer U.S. foreign policy. We've had multiple rounds of U.S. security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. We've strengthened our engagement with NATO and AUKUS countries. We've passed the Chips and Sciences Act, and all of those have been bipartisan. The old notion, it used to be that partisan politics stopped at the water's edge. Unfortunately, we're not going to see that going forward. And this election is going to have tremendous consequences, I think, for foreign policy of the U.S. Basically, it's going to be isolation and disengagement versus internationalism and partnerships. Those are the two choices with the two alternatives in this election. Now, personnel is a big part of policy, and so we need to look at who's going to be in positions in the two administrations, but it's also about quantity as well as quality. Who is going to be willing to invest resources into the State Department, into USAID? Who sees foreign policy as an important part, or who sees diplomacy as an important part of what we do in terms of policy? Who will shore up different programs within the State Department? We have certainly seen that the Trump administration in the past and Republicans in Congress now are not going down that path, unlike the Biden administration and what I anticipate would be from the Harris administration. In terms of specific people, a Harris administration would likely see Phil Gordon, who's a longtime national security advisor of hers, either retain that role for President Harris or move into the position of Secretary of State. Either way, he's going to be the one driving most of foreign policy. He may be a relatively new name to some of you, but he is certainly a known commodity in foreign policy circles in Washington. And he's cut from the same cloth as Blinken, and he is an ardent internationalist. He also served once as Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, State of European Affairs, so he is well-versed and has a lot of experience dealing with the U.S.-EU and U.S.-NATO issues, and he's very likely to continue the Biden position in that regard. Now, there's a bit more speculation about what a potential Trump foreign policy team would look like. Some of the names that have been mentioned are Senator Bill Hagerty from Tennessee, former Secretary Advisor Robert O'Brien, former senior Pentagon official Eldridge Colby. These are all names that have been floated, and they have traditional foreign policy bona fides, so they have experience in this area too. Rick Grinnell, however, who's perhaps more well-known than some of the other names I mentioned, but not for the right reasons, is also in the running for a senior foreign policy position. I have great concerns about that, as well as some of you should, especially when you're talking about dealing with the Balkans. You know, go back to 1991. Secretary of State James Baker once famously said, "We don't have a dog in that fight," referencing all the dynamics of Southeastern Europe. And that isolationist policy catalyzed the violent dissolution of Yugoslavia. Should Vice President Harris win in November, we can expect a continuation of Biden's policy for the region. Engagement with partners in the region to ensure sovereignty, territorial integrity, protecting the multi-ethnic character and functioning of state-level institutions. This should be very important for countries like Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Kosovo, so they can continue to make progress towards democracy and rule of law reforms that they are on their way to making for EU ascension. Now, if Trump takes over and you have Grinnell in there, you're likely to see him go back to Baker's kind of blasé approach to this region. During his first term, it seemed that Trump was kind of baffled by what was going on in the region, and he kind of unwittingly let NATO countries go against each other, attack each other, tried to use economic tools to no avail, and yielded power to some of the malign actors in the region and has cozied up to some of the others since then. So it will be a very different approach, I think, to the area. Now, Grinnell, let's not forget, was asked to mediate tensions between Kosovo and Serbia in 2019. He quickly lost the trust of Pristina. All this happened while Germany was weighing whether or not to declare him, when he was ambassador to Germany, as persona non grata. So, having him at the lead will certainly change the dynamic, what we've seen with Biden and what we anticipate with Harris. Now, there are going to be other policy professionals in there with Grinnell who can try to hold him in check and who have, I guess, a more sensible internationalist approach, but it will certainly make a difference. One other thing I'd say briefly about the difference between the policy approaches of the potential two administrations is that with what you'll likely see with Bill Gordon and Kamala Harris and his team will be a focus on protecting our partners, shoring up our alliances, defeating Putin in Ukraine, and safeguarding, global stability. Now, the Trump administration may agree with this in principle, but their primary focus is going to be China. Now, I agree China poses a sincere threat to the U.S. and to European interests beyond the Indo-Pacific, but we need to do more than one thing at a time. So with Trump, support for Ukraine will likely wane. There'll be less action. Same thing is true for support for NATO, and it'll all be focused on China. So I'll be glad to answer any more questions about these specific points.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dina, for that. That was excellent, very comprehensive.